Well, thank you, Matthew, and to everyone on the call this evening. I'm just uh, honored to be speaking with you all this evening, and I'm very appreciative of your time in joining me in sharing about this topic, which I call ornitherapy. And for me, that's using birds as a guiding light towards a healthier and happier life. So, we're all here this evening because we love birds, right? But is there something more in it for us beyond just this enjoyment we get? Well, I certainly think so, because ornitherapy helped to save my life, and perhaps it can help to save yours too. I'll share a little bit more about my story in a few minutes. But the fact is that we all need birds in nature for our own overall well-being. And Hippocrates said thousands of years ago that nature itself is the best physician. But how many of you have had your doctor prescribe you nature as a remedy or an antidote to something that was ailing you? Probably not yet, but we'll get back to that in a few minutes. The fact is that it all starts right outside our own doors. This concept of using birds therapeutically, of using birds in order to help heal us, to comfort us, to calm us. And I think a lot of us can probably relate to this even more in the last few years because of the pandemic that we've all been experiencing. And I don't know about you, but during the pandemic lockdowns, one of the things that provided me comfort was just watching through my window at the birds that were right outside my own door. And for a lot of people during the pandemic, there were feelings of isolation because we couldn't have our friends over. We couldn't have our families come visit for holidays, even. But what we could do was invite birds to dine at our table through bird feeders, or perhaps by offering water or planting native plants to draw them in to feed. And a lot of people found comfort. A lot of people discovered bird watching during the pandemic because they realized that when we take time to slow down, there's something waiting for us right outside our door that can provide us comfort, some peace. And I like to say that during the pandemic, there were a lot of people that helped each other. And because birds provided comfort and provided something that we could do that was safe, and birds paid us visits, there were people out there like Lisa Myers, who owns the Los Gatos Bird Watchers, who were, I see it as hometown heroes, people who kept their doors open to provide seed, to provide opportunities for people to experience birds in nature. They were providing a sort of healing without even knowing it. And I feel like a lot of people who owned shops like Lisa's did not get the kind of recognition during this pandemic that they really did deserve for providing this for their communities. And I don't know about you, but I just like to pay gratitude to these shop owners like Lisa, who could provide people with bird seed and kept us allowed us to keep this joy going during a really difficult time. Because enjoying the quality of these experiences of birds were powerful. And I'm tonight going to be speaking about birds specifically, but a lot of the research involves nature and these experiences with nature as a healer. But why birds? Because birds are charismatic megafauna. They're everywhere and perfect gateways into these deeper connections that research and science show have these immeasurable effects to our overall well-being. But we just need to be open to seeking them out. But we all know that birds are everywhere and wherever we are and wherever we go. And by seeking in birds and taking in each moment, we are rewarded with benefits to our mind, body, and soul. And this is ornitherapy. So what is going on here? Well, research shows that birds and nature distract us from what's going on in our own lives, providing us a temporary redirection, sort of like changing the channel of our mindset, right? And so when we watch birds, and probably a lot of you can attest to this, when we get outdoors and we stop focusing on our computers, on our cell phones, and all of these pressures and pulls in our lives, we in fact are giving our minds a respite, like a little break. Psychologists call this attention restoration, which means that we're giving the analytic side of our brain a break, and the side of our brain that focuses on worry and something called rumination, where you have these negative thought patterns that just keep looping over again in your mind. Probably all of us can relate to experiences like this, right? But when we go outside and we start listening to birds, or we start watching birds and being captivated by them, this changes our mindset, reboosts and re-triggers something innate inside of us. And research shows that this is good for us and provides overall benefits to how we feel, and our productivity and creativity spike and increase. I believe that all corporate centers in the United States and globally should have natural spaces, and should require their workers to take an ornitherapy break, or just to get outside and engage in nature. Because when we do this, studies show that workers will be more productive and also spike in their creativity. So that return of the investment on the employer's part would be worthwhile. Plus, we all know that birds are enjoyable to watch. And again, studies show that they help us maintain a happier and healthier life. One of the beauties of the natural world is that it is without any judgment. So what I mean by this is that birds and nature, when we go outside, we could be having the worst day. We could be feeling crummy. We could feel like we're having a bad hair day, or in my case, a no hair day, right? But nature, when we go out and start walking and looking, or just sitting in our yards, connecting, is not going to have judgment of who we are, what we believe, how we feel, how we look, right? And birds in nature are accessible for all people to experience and enjoy. Even people in the most urban settings, who you might think don't have a lot of access to nature, most urban settings have rock pigeons, have starlings, have house sparrows. There's even sidewalks with cracks, with grass pushing up. Nature is all around us for all people to experience and enjoy. This image here is of my son, Henry, who is a college student. Henry was going through a really difficult time several years ago. And I asked him to go birding with me one morning. He wasn't a birder, but he was so depressed. I was worried about his well-being. He hemmed and hawed and didn't want to do it, but I promised him that I would take him home if he wasn't into it. And he reluctantly agreed. And as we were walking, I knew about a couple of saw-whet owls at one of our urban wildlife refuges near where I live here in Philadelphia. And I knew there were the owls. I knew exactly where the owls were. I'd seen them earlier in the day. As we were walking along this path, Henry, who had never seen a saw-whet before, was kind of glum and not feeling great, not very conversational. And I was chatting with him, and I looked over, and then the tree, as we were passing, I noticed this, a tiny little saw-whet owl that nobody had seen earlier in that day. We had just done a big census of the refuge that morning. And as I put this is the view through my Sponiscope with my phone. As I put the scope on the owl and I had Henry peering through, I noticed a transformation occurring. For the first time in weeks, I saw a smile break out on his face. I noticed his body language changed after a few minutes. And what was really magical was a couple of ladies were walking down the trail towards us, and we invited them to look through the scope to see this little owl. One of the ladies, while she was watching through my scope, started to cry. she was experiencing awe. And in that moment, you could see the reaction from everybody that was witnessing the owl in that moment and witnessing this person experiencing awe. And this is powerful when people have these connections to birds. Studies show that when people experience awe, they have a diminished sense of self, meaning they get out of their own headspace and they start thinking about something different. Again, it's getting into resetting our minds, redirecting our attention. Additionally, when people experience awe, they have a desire to take care of things. They become more empathetic. They become more compassionate. They want to care for something. So it makes sense that organizations like the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, when you have group outings and you're providing these opportunities for people to experience awe, and it doesn't have to be something extraordinary. It could be a simple bird, a bird that's common in your area. Perhaps it's a singing Buick's wren. Perhaps it's a bush tit. A bird like that could be magic for somebody new to the experience. And by inviting awe and having people experience that, that in itself is a conservation initiative. Because again, people want to take care of something that they fall in love with. Birds capture our attention and provide us these connections to the natural world. And so many people don't even realize that they're actually practicing ornitherapy. And this concept is not a new one. So for thousands of years, particularly indigenous people understood the connection between nature and human life and well-being. But we've just moved so far away from this concept in our modern era. And this word ornitherapy is not my word or that of my co-authors. We selected it for the title of the book because it is so aptly describing this process of using birds as a therapeutic vehicle into wellness. But I could first find reference to this word in 1979 in the British Journal of Medicine by Dr. A.F. Cox, who suggested that as a tranquilizer, bird watching may be as effective as any drug, but cheaper and safer than many. Dr. Cox realized that when he prescribed bird watching to some of his most despondent patients, he saw a reaction that was not negative, unlike a lot of the drugs he had to prescribe. And so think about this. Has bird watching acted as a tranquilizer for you in your life? The fact is that we all need ornitherapy. And if we allow birds and nature to slow us down, we are self-medicating with doses of ornitherapy. So nature can be a refuge for people and for birds. What happens, studies show, is that when we step outside and into green spaces and into the natural world and start connecting, chemical responses start occurring inside of our bodies. So you probably are familiar with cortisol, the hormone that flips into overdrive when we are stressed out. Well, what happens is cortisol levels starts to lower at about 20 minutes into being immersed in a natural landscape, being in a situation where you are connecting with the natural world around you. So from 20 to 40 minutes at a time, this dose of connecting to nature can provide immeasurable benefits to our health. We know that cortisol can erode away at our overall well-being, particularly with our immune system. So when cortisol levels are activated and triggered and continuously flowing through our bodies for days on end, perhaps it's even for weeks based on what you're going through in your life, the stress, the anxiety, other things. This prevents our body from fighting disease like cancer, from autoimmune disease, viruses even, right? It also means that our metabolism can become off whack. So I say if you're going on a diet or if you need to gain weight, well, make sure that in addition to healthy eating and getting good exercise and good sleep, you're also throwing in some ornitherapy and immersions in nature, because this in itself will help your body put your metabolism back where it needs to go. Again, when cortisol levels are elevated, it just lends to an overall state of unhealthiness. So if we can use birds in nature to help us lower our cortisol, can it be that easy? This place you see here on the screen is Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, a place here in Pennsylvania where it was actually the first migratory bird census ever started in the United States, and has been a leader in raptor conservation since 1934. So I am a volunteer hawk counter at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in fall. And this past fall, I was sitting atop the lookout, and we have a lot of visitors that come there for hiking, to watch the migration unfolding, and just to get outside. And this one day, a gentleman came up on the side here. So I was sitting right behind that fence there. That's the counter's pit. And the gentleman came up on the trail you can see here. And he said to me, excuse me, I need to let you know that I need to scream at the top of my lungs. Blank you, COVID-19, except for he didn't use the word blank. I think you could probably fill in the blank to get the idea of what he was saying to me. I was a little shocked. I'm sure the surprise on my face led to the next comment, which was, let me explain. I don't want to scare you, but here's what's going on. I am an ICU doctor in a hospital in New Jersey. And he said, I can't take it anymore. He said, I haven't had a day off in weeks. All of my staff are falling apart. Some of them are getting COVID. Some doctors I know have died from COVID. And every day I'm having to make life and death decisions about patients who are young. This was back in September with the Delta variant, when a lot of younger people were impacted in very negative ways. And of course, I wouldn't normally let somebody scream profanity at the top of their lungs from this lookout point, but I could totally understand where he was coming from. And I invited him to come sit down in front of the lookout and watch what we were doing. And he shared a few more stories and asked us what we were doing, and started watching the birds as they flew overhead. And I watched him change in his demeanor. I watched his body kind of melt into the rocks. And he never did have to scream at the top of his lungs, because this is the power of being in nature. Nature is a refuge for people and a sanctuary for people to find peace, soothing, and healing. This concept is not something that, again, is new. And actually, in other parts of the world, people are already using practices like ornitherapy as preventative medicine. So in Japan, this practice you may have heard of called forest bathing is used as preventative medicine. Now, forest bathing, or Shinden-yoku, was started in the 1980s, and it was founded, this concept was discovered because doctors in Tokyo during the tech boom noticed that people were getting very, very sick. Their immune responses had been diminished. People were getting cancer, autoimmune disease. They were suffering from incredible amounts of stress, anxiety. The suicide rate went up. And a team of doctors got together and said, we need to do something to help our people, because they're not going to be productive, because they've become indoor species, basically, is what was going on because of this technological boom. So they did an experiment, and this experiment involved taking people out into nature, into forested landscapes in Japan, and they noticed that this was showing effects that were positive for people's health. So the levels of disease in these people, the levels of stress, the responses to anxiety, also, these other effects in their immune system and health started to show progress in the right direction. And these doctors were like, okay, well, getting people out of the indoor spaces and their analytical minds is helpful. Getting people outdoors and slowing down in forest ecosystems was having positive effects. But why? And so they started to do some study on this, and they discovered that trees emit a chemical compound called phytoncides. And these phytoncides in a tree's life help protect a tree as a barrier against disease, against pests, and also fungi, right? But what they also discovered was that when people are absorbing and inhaling these same phytoncides, these chemical compounds released from trees, that these phytoncides activate killer cells in our immune system called NK cells, or natural killer cells. And these actively target quick growing cells in our bodies, including cancer. So if it means that just walking in a forest ecosystem or being surrounded by plant material outdoors and slowing our pace and listening to birds can help fight cancer, well, I don't know about you, but sign me right up, right? Because it's free and it's accessible to people. And in the United Kingdom, doctors are prescribing social prescriptions as a drug-free wellness plan. And this is gaining traction. So what's happening is the National Health System in the UK have physicians writing prescriptions for patients who are coming in who are kind of on that edge, like, might write a prescription, but let's try something else before going on medicine to see if we can alleviate some of these symptoms, because we know that being out in nature again, lowers our cortisol levels, helps elevate our body's immune response, also helps lower our blood pressure, and studies show also strengthen our heart muscles. I like to say birds are truly heart healthy because they add these benefits that truly strengthen our hearts, right? They can help us stabilize our cardiac systems, lowering our blood pressure, but also they fill our hearts with joy. Now, this is happening in the UK. In Canada, recently, doctors teamed up with the national parks and they developed a parks prescription pass, which meant that doctors could now write a prescription for some patients to go visit national parks. Wow, right? So here in the US, we have a completely different healthcare structure, right? Our healthcare system is very different. So it's going to take us a little longer to gain traction with this concept of using nature and birds. But in the UK, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds has jumped on this bandwagon, and they are supporting the NHS and delivering these programs and delivering these prescriptions. Well, what can we do about that here in the US? And why aren't we having major groups? Why isn't National Audubon helping support healthcare providers to share this concept? Well, this is probably a grandiose project, but here's what we can do. People like you and I, if birds and nature have done something beneficial for you in your life, made you feel better, provided you comfort, provided you a stress relief, share this with your doctors. This is a grassroots effort. The more doctors that hear this message, this testimony from people like you and I, the more doctors are going to understand and share these same benefits with other patients. And there's a lot of research to back this, and more emerging every day. So here's one study in particular that suggests that this is from the University of Exeter in 2017, along with the British Trust for Ornithology and University of Queensland. And this study suggests that people living in areas with more birds are less likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and stress. And the best part of all is those people don't have to know anything about birds. They don't have to be avid birders or even want to know what something is, be out there identifying birds. They just have to be surrounded by biodiverse, rich ecosystem that have a lot of birds, right? The fact is that ornitherapy is a conservation initiative just wrapped in a different package. The more people that recognize that birds and nature are good for us and can be beneficial to our well-being, the more people are going to want to take care of it, right? And birds offer us so much, particularly with their wonderful songs that fill our landscapes. So can birdsong make us feel better? Well, they can, because a couple things start happening when we listen to birdsong. First off, studies show that when you listen to music that you love, dopamine, that chemical messenger that facilitates the experience of pleasure, is activated and releases and helps us experience joy, right? So it does make sense that when we listen to birdsong that we enjoy, it makes us feel better. It facilitates the release of dopamine. So, whoops, I went ahead of myself because I want you to just for a moment to listen to this beautiful wood thrush singing and see what you think. Does it make you feel better? Whoops. Yep. Oh dear, I apologize. My slide is moving too rapidly. We'll just skip on. I think maybe it didn't work. So a study was published by Cal Poly in 2020, which suggests that avian sounds heard during hikes boosted people's sense of well-being. So what was going on there? There are two control groups, Group A and Group B. Both went on the same hike. But for Group A, they infused artificial birdsong by hiding little speakers along the trail. With Group B, they did not do this. After each group took their hike, they took a survey and measured how, different things, but including how people were feeling. And they noticed a marked increase in the report of feelings of overall well-being between Group A and versus Group B. And because of that, they were able to directly correlate that birdsong was the factor that was causing people to feel better, experiencing a better sense of overall well-being. Now, that does make sense because when birds sing, they feel safe. So this little Carolina wren that was singing his heart out in my yard is not going to sit there singing if the Cooper's hawk's nearby, right? We are animals, and instinctively our minds are pre-programmed, whether we know it or recognize it at all, but they're pre-programmed to interpret birdsong, bird language. And we recognize that when birds sing, they are relaxed. And this too puts us in a more relaxed and alert state of mind. And so this concept of listening to birdsong, of that being therapeutic, is gaining more traction. In fact, I recently saw a study that suggests that if you're learning to do something new, or you're studying for a test, if you put on some birdsong in the background, and you can find birdsong on YouTube videos, there's plenty of those out there if you just type in forested landscape birds or something like that. And if you listen to this while you're trying to learn, you're going to be able to recall information quicker and retain that information longer. So give it a try the next time you're learning something new. Here's a young Keanu Reeves, the actor, and he stated that for him, nature is a place where you retreat whenever you feel exhausted or sad. And he's more happy when he's surrounded by the sound of birds than the sound of people. I don't know about you, but sometimes that's true for me as well. So knowing all of this, could ornitherapy be the wonder drug of the 21st century? Well, I certainly think so. I believe that this was my strongest medicine during a really difficult period in my life. So I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer that hit me out of the blue. I had no family history of any cancer and was a very, what I thought, healthy young woman. I had two young sons at the time, and our lives had become quickly complicated because this all happened shortly after September 11th. And my husband was a naval reservist who was activated to go to Saudi Arabia December 2001. And we thought that his 5-month deployment was going to be the most difficult hurdle our family was challenged with, given the state of the world. But within a month after he left, I ended up taking my boys sledding and fracturing 2 vertebrae, having compression fractures in my spine. And things got tough really quick. And then about a month later, I was diagnosed with this breast cancer, which hit me out of the blue. I was lucky though, because I already had birds in my life, and I had no idea what a constant companion they would be for me during my healing, during my journey to wellness. So I had to undergo many surgeries and 6 months of rigorous chemotherapy. One of the most difficult parts for me of going through this experience, outside of the pain and the uncertainty, and a very, uncertain prognosis, was losing my hair, because I was young. None of my friends were bald. Didn't know how I was going to pull it off, but more so because my son Alex, who was 7 at the time, told me that this was going to be very upsetting for him. It would be a symbol that his mommy was sick, that it was going to, identify me as someone different. So I lost my hair all at once, and it happened on a Saturday night. It's kind of weird to lose it all at once. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the hair like this. Do you throw it in the trash can? That seemed kind of weird, but it also seemed weird to keep it. So I decided I'd set it in a little party bag somebody had given me and put it on a shelf in my closet and just think about it. So the next morning, before my family woke up, I knew I was going to need to process this loss. So I grabbed my binoculars. It happened to be Mother's Day, which, is the height of spring migration in Eastern Pennsylvania. And I went to the nearest trail, a place that I loved to bird. And as I was walking along, I knew that nature wasn't going to judge me for how I looked. Nature wasn't going to judge me and treat me differently, because I was now this very sick person who was barely able to lift her binoculars because of the back injury. I knew that the birds weren't going to judge me, and I could just be grounded, be centered. As I was walking along, I was listening to the symphony of the bird song that morning, and we had a lot of those newly arrived migrants. And I picked out the sound of a cerulean warbler, a bird that's rare in our area. And I lifted my binoculars up and I managed to find the bird, which it was just amazing in that moment. But as I was watching him, I noticed there was a nest right behind him. And in that moment, a female cerulean parachuted out of that nest. And I was stunned. I was experiencing awe in that moment. And as I watched that singing cerulean, I realized that he had just winged his way back from South America, where he had spent winter, and that he was no different than me, that he had faced so many pressures to survive, that he and his mate were there to raise their young, just like I was. And in that moment, I was living in the moment with the birds. I wasn't worried about what my doctor had told me and looking at my survival rates being very slim. I wasn't looking towards the future, worrying, what was I going to be here next year? Would I be able to live to see my kids grow up? All I was focused was on the moment I had, because all we have is the present moment, right? And in that moment, I was able to separate, to redirect my mind, to redirect my attention. It was a gift from the birds. And those birds gave me the will to survive in a different way. And that hair that I lost, I was telling you about, well, I remember reading that if you put dog's hair out during spring, that sometimes a bird might take it and line their nest with it. So I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try an experiment. So I ended up taking half of that hair and putting it into a suet cage that I had and hung it right outside my kitchen window, because I figured that with my back and all the surgeries and the chemo, I might have a shot at making it to the kitchen window at least once a day. And so one day I got really lucky, because I was at the kitchen sink washing some dishes. And as I was watching, a tufted titmouse, a bird that's common in my area that visits my feeders, came in and grabbed strands of my hair and started pulling it out of the suet cage. And I watched that bird carry away my wasted hair. And I realized in that moment that that bird was repurposing my hair, that my hair was going to have new meaning, was going to help new life. And in that moment, my loss of hair and what that meant to me, it didn't matter anymore, because I realized that it had a new purpose, and that loss became so much less significant because of the birds. To me, that was a symbol of hope. And because the birds have given me so much hope, and I truly believe have helped me survive and helped me give a perspective on my overall well-being, that my goal is to do everything I can do to help protect them. So I have dedicated my life to helping birds, to help save birds, because this practice of ornitherapy helps to fuel stewardship. And so here are my boys. They're now grown up now. I'm just one very lucky lady to have made it. And I really do owe it to the birds. So I was talking to you about being in the moment with birds, and this is a practice of mindful birding. So what is mindful birding? Well, it might sound complicated, but actually it's incredibly simple. And it's just an awareness that you are in the moment with the goal to slow yourself down. And being intentional in this practice while you're observing birds, an intention to turn your attention to birds while focusing on being in the moment, the right here and the right now. And being without judgment of our experiences with the birds, letting the experience be what it will be. So, for example, for a lot of times I get stressed out because I didn't get a good enough look at the bird. Oh, oops, I did it. I didn't make the correct identification. I start beating myself up because I didn't ID it right away, right? Probably a lot of you can attest to this, right? And or I use my camera a lot. And so I didn't get the bird in the right light. All of these things start eroding away from the experience of being in the right here, the right now, and just allowing things to happen and being okay with that, while sparking and feeding curiosity and allowing ourselves to have a childlike wonder, to ask questions about birds. Why are they doing what they do? What does it mean when a bird, flies from one branch down to the ground and then back up again, or whatever your question might be, but just feeding that curiosity. One of the tips I have when I give my workshops for mindful birding ornitherapy is to invite people to close their eyes, to engage their senses. For me, because I am digitally distracted all the time, it's hard for me to put my cell phone down, particularly if I'm going out, and looking at birds. And I need to just recenter myself. And so what I do is just shut my eyes. And when you just shut your eyes and just listen for 30 seconds, for a minute, we actually tap into another area of our brain. And this in itself provides us grounding, and it just centers us in a different way. Give it a try sometime and see how it works for you. This practice of using mindfulness with nature, coupling this with nature, is gaining traction. So mindfulness-based stress reduction is something that was founded in Massachusetts by a doctor called Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. And I've studied this at length, have done coursework in mindfulness-based stress reduction, but I was first introduced to it as a cancer patient, because we know that mindfulness, this practice of being mindful, helps people experience less pain, anxiety, and stress. Now you can find it on your Fitbit. If you have a Fitbit app and Fitbit watch or Fitbit app, it even tracks your mindfulness. So this is becoming much more mainstream. But other organizations are realizing the power that this holds when we combine the power of nature and birds together with these practices of mindfulness. We create an even more amplified ability to make a difference in improving our well-being. So Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge in Sanibel, Florida, recently opened a trail, which is Mindfulness in Nature Trail. And there, I was delighted to see, I was down there giving this presentation to Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge back in February. And that week they had a Wellness and Nature Week, and they had a ribbon cutting for this trail. But basically, you can walk along the trail and flip up these little 4x4 posts have these, you can see them here, these little flip ups. And it just invites the reader to experience a sense of mindfulness while in nature. But they even have a QR code, which you can see here. And if you have a smart device and you want to, you can put it over the code, and it will bring you to a recording with a guided mindfulness practice, which is really fantastic. So if this is happening at a national wildlife refuge, we know that things are really happening to bring people together in nature for wellness. Now, one of my co-authors is Sophie Crossley, the daughter of ID Guide author Richard Crossley. And Sophie probably wouldn't identify herself so much as a bird watcher. However, she is a free diver. She's actually in Nicaragua right now as a free dive instructor. And Sophie, as a free diver, doesn't use any oxygen tanks or snorkeling. You can see her right here. This is an image of her taken underwater when she was in Thailand while we were putting our book together, actually. And Sophie can go underwater over 100 feet deep and for over 4 minutes. How does she do that? I'll let her share that with you.
When I free dive, my awareness expands from myself to the world around me, the feeling of water moving on my skin, oxygen filling my lungs, the pressure of the ocean hugging my body. In these moments, I notice so many beautiful details that are often lost above the surface. Mindfulness for me starts in the simple moments of everyday life. It doesn't have to be big, life-changing observations. It can start with little things, like noticing the leaves rustling in the wind, or a songbird landing on a branch, or even giving your full attention to this video. Your eyes and your body are here, but where is your mind? Here, right now, is where we should be. We can use anything as an anchor to the present moment. With Ornitherapy, we aspire to use our connection with birds and the natural world to bring us back to the right here and right now.
And for some people, connecting to birds and nature is a spiritual experience. So Dr. Diane Husick is the Dean of the School of Natural and Health Sciences at Moravian University in Pennsylvania. Diane is a climate scientist, a conservationist, and a birder, and she's going to share a few words about this.
Psychologists have found that people that experience a sense of awe have psychological benefits from that particular experience. We know that time in nature, being around trees, can lower our blood pressure and stress levels. We know that soil bacteria can improve cognitive function. There are many, many benefits to being in nature. For me, a sense of awe comes from standing on the shores of Lake Superior, the vastness of the water, the space, the roar of the waves, or it comes in the solitude that you gain from being in a growth forest. But it also comes from the birds. I'm in awe at all the diversity, the shapes, the forms, the behaviors, the adaptations, and the beauty of the music that they provide.
So Diane is also speaking about this experience of awe in the magnitude or awe in the simple, like I was saying before, and what that brings for us. So it doesn't have to be something as powerful as watching a snow geese fly out from Bosque. These experiences we have with birds and nature stir something in our souls, in our spirit, and provide us that recharge that we need. So even through simple experiences, we can find these connections. So Matt Young has worked with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. If you've ever submitted an audio recording to eBird of red crossbills or some of the other crossbill types, you might have gotten in touch with Matt because he's worked hard on that project, has also founded the Finch Research Network, but today works with young people who are coupled with disability. And Matt has an interesting perspective, and I'm going to let him share it. I won't say this in advance. He comes off sounding very soft. You might not be able to hear him right away, but it gets louder.
From an ornitherapy perspective. I was late to birding. I was in my mid-20s. I had just taken a job at Yellowstone, and I was at Upper Falls, and surprise, surprise, but a flock of red crossbills flew in, and I was forever captivated and watching them extract the seed from the pine cones. I obviously love my finches. I think they got a lot to teach us, being that they're social and they work together. But my whole worldview changed at that moment, pretty much, and it continued from the months on from there. And, the outdoors, we used to all connect with the outdoors at a much greater level before we were, had our heads in these handheld devices that we're in now. But, whether, for me, whether it's the outdoors provides a physical playground or an intellectual laboratory, or just general overall emotional help with support and guidance, it can really kind of help, rebalance. And I think this is a discussion from enthusiasts to scientists that we all should be having on how much nature can help us from an overall general health perspective.
And so Matt touched on this concept of what birds and nature can do for us. And for a lot of people, this feeling of isolation, whether that be to the pandemic or perhaps to disease process or to other life circumstances, when you feel isolated, it's difficult. And this feeling can sometimes be remedied by, again, inviting birds closer in through offering seed and feed, through offering water and native plants. This here is my dad, and my dad suffered from a form of dementia called progressive primary aphasia, which meant he lost his ability to communicate with people that he loved using words. And also had a difficult time with processing language. But I noticed that as he descended deeper into this dementia, that while he couldn't speak to his loved ones and people he cared about, his relationship with nature and birds changed. And I noticed that he would go outside in his yard and just start whistling and calling in the birds. And the birds actually started to kind of seem to respond to this. It was actually quite interesting. I have this little video clip here, but my point is this. If you know somebody in your life that's feeling isolated, bring birds into their lives. Introduce them to a bird feeder or a water feature, something that can bring birds in closer. When I had to select a memory care facility for my dad in the end of his disease, I ended up selecting a community that, because one of the reasons why is because there were bird feeders outside people's windows. And I could witness the residents there connecting because they had a visitor, they had a guest. And this is the power that birds can provide us with feelings of loneliness and isolation. So perhaps there's somebody in your life that you can bring birds in closer for. We all have those times in life when we need to stay afloat, and birds can provide us that buoyancy, can become like our life jackets. Here's somebody that you may recognize. He's from Northern California. This is Alvaro Jaramillo. Alvaro came to me when he learned that I was going to be giving this presentation on ornitherapy and said there was a story that he'd like to share that a lot of people didn't know. And I'll let him share that message with you here.
So, hi everyone. This is my ornitherapy story. I'm Alvaro Jaramillo. I'm a full-time professional birder, right? So I have a company that does birding tourism. I write for magazines and books, and everything in my working life is about birds. And about 3 years ago, I had some weird symptoms at home, and I went on a trip on a tour that I was leading in Bhutan, and had a really, I would call it a violent episode where I couldn't stand up. I got dizzy and so forth, and just was awful, and ended up losing all of my hearing from this probably viral infection that I didn't know about. We never could figure it out. I lost all of my hearing in my left ear, and it was replaced with the ringing tinnitus, or tinnitus as some people call it. That kind of drives you crazy. Well, if you know about birding, you know that hearing fully and being able to locate sounds is one of the ways that you find birds. And suddenly I couldn't do it. And I didn't know if I could continue actually doing all of the things I do for my work. And it turned out that I could, and I have, and I've shifted how I do things. I've incorporated other people. There's been a lot of positives that come out of this awful situation. But the point here is that the reason I was able to get through it was the birds themselves. It's hard to explain, but when you don't have 2 ears, it's as if you hear in one dimension, two-dimensional. You cannot actually, your brain cannot differentiate what's important and what isn't important. Everything kind of sounds the same. And I'd go to big places like, supermarket, and the sounds were shocking. I would get stressed. I would not, I felt really vulnerable when I was in anything public because of the way my brain couldn't process the sound in a way that made sense of it. But the only place where I felt normal and completely at ease and entirely like the guy I used to be was when I was watching birds. So I'd be outside, and all of the natural sounds would function. I could hear it, I could understand. Maybe I couldn't spot exactly where that savannah sparrow was singing, but it was where I could feel calm and really think about exactly the point is that the world is still happening. There's all this beauty that's going on, that I am still part of this amazing natural world. And that has been the single most important, not the only, the most important part in my healing from this crazy situation. Maybe by next year, I'll have a cochlear implant or something else that's going to help me out. And that's going to be cool. But if it wasn't for the birds, I don't think I would be doing this well with these crazy situations. So ironically, the birds help me to be a better birder and stay doing what I've always loved to do, which is watch birds and show people birds and enjoy birds with a community of bird people. So thank you, birds.
And I'm happy to report that Alvaro did get his cochlear implant and he's doing great. But sometimes birds can help us heal our heart. I'm going to let Liz Pettit share her story.
Birding has been a passion of mine for over a decade now, as is photography. It wasn't until a recent tragedy in my life that I found myself in, I guess you could say, a different relationship with birds. 2 years ago, my 23-year-old son died very unexpectedly. Grieving his loss was a very dark path for some time, and as I slowly found the light again, I discovered something unexpected. Birds were revealing themselves to me in a way that ultimately played a part in healing of my heart. I now see birds, and aside from the mindfulness and beauty and joy that they bring, they also sometimes bring an amazing gift in the form of a reminder, or you could say a sign from my son. Just a couple weekends ago, early on a Sunday morning, I headed out to a nearby lake where I bird on occasion, and I came upon 1,000 or so Canada geese. And shortly thereafter, I spotted what looked like 2 white geese and immediately pulled my binoculars to my eyes. It was a pair of almost angelic looking Canada geese, both a very diffused white and light gray plumage. And as I took these stunning beauties in, I knew right away these were a gift for a son. See, the anniversary of my son's death, which has been heavy on my heart and mind this month, was coming up in another week. So yet again, one of many signs I've experienced where birds gave me the gift of peace and comfort, the spirit of my son, and the continued healing of my heart.
Even watching the most common birds can teach us something and be therapeutic, which is why myself and Richard Crossley and Sophie Crossley were eager to share this message of ornitherapy. And this prompted us to take on this project of creating this book, Ornitherapy for Your Mind, Body, and Soul. And throughout this book, we aim to guide people into deeper connections with the birds right outside their own doors through prompts and explorations in ornitherapy, for providing people the opportunity to think about and look at and practice a more mindful approach to bird watching. Because the fact is that birds and nature offer us something beyond that enjoyment. And this quote from Andy Goldsworthy, I think, really sums it up. We often forget that we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say we have lost our connection to nature, we've lost our connection to ourselves. The more we look at birds, the more we understand them and ourselves, and the happier and healthier we will be. Watching birds brings us so much joy, but there's so much more in it for us, for our minds, bodies, and spirits. So my question to you is, have birds impacted your life? If they have, spread the word. I just want to thank everybody here this evening for allowing me to share this concept about ornitherapy and how we can use birds, or how we do already use birds, for a healthier lifestyle. If you would like a copy of the book Ornitherapy, get your copy from Los Gatos Birdwatcher. It's in your local area. And again, I really truly believe that Lisa Myers and her team there are hometown heroes for the work that they did, helping to provide people these connections for their well-being and for the birds. So thank you again. I put my contact information there as well if anybody wants to ask any questions, over email or share stories, whatever. But also I would love to hear if anybody in the audience has any questions, but more so if you have any experiences where birds were your guiding light into a healthier life.